Curtis Kimball's wife told him that he was getting weird and that he needed to make friends. So, naturally, he made pancakes. Coming out of the COVID lockdown, Curtis realized his wife might be right, and he didn't actually know many of his neighbors. So he decided to make flyers advertising a sidewalk pancake party. He thought this might be crazy, but when the morning of the pancake party arrived, people showed up. A lot of them. Nearly 100 people came to the inaugural pancake party. Curtis met neighbors of all ages, and they made connections with one another, too. One neighbor spotted someone in line she hadn't seen in 15 years. A colleague from across the country she had no idea had moved to the neighborhood. By popular demand, subsequent pancake parties have grown to feed and connect more than 300 people in a morning. Curtis understood the truth that a pancake isn't always just a pancake. And as you'll hear today, a bunk bed doesn't have to be just a bunk bed. Sometimes when you meet a tangible need, it can become so much more.
Welcome to the More Than Enough podcast, where we invite some of our friends to help you and some of your friends work together to provide more than enough, filling the biggest gaps for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care where you live. Here's your host, Jason Weber.
Hey, welcome to the More Than Enough podcast. I'm here with my friend Susan Klaus from Agape Ranch in Corpus Christi, Texas. Hey, Susan, how are you doing this morning?
Doing well. How are you, Jason?
I'm doing great. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. I am excited to have you help us get this thing kicked off today. Susan is acting as my co-pilot as we launch this episode. And you heard that in that opening, we talked about pancakes. And so, Susan, before we get going, we need to talk about something very important. What is your pancake topping of choice?
Oh, pancake toppings. Just plain maple syrup, because my husband makes this really great banana chocolate chip pancakes. And so really after that, you got all the sugar. How about you?
Yeah, I'm all about the bananas and chocolate chips as well. But my favorite is whipped cream, bananas, pecans, and then just a boatload of syrup on top of that. It looks amazing. It also looks really bad for you, but I love it.
So you would just want the toppings with a little bit of pancake.
Yeah. You could just give me a bowl of just that stuff and without the pancake in it, and I wouldn't even know the difference. That is true.
That's funny.
Well, we're talking about today that a pancake is not always just a pancake. And when we were talking about this theme, you guys immediately came to mind. Susan was a part of a pilot grant program that we did here at More Than Enough with one of our partner organizations. And when we got the report back from something they had done, we were blown away. And Susan, can you tell us a little bit about your goal to match young adults who are aging out of foster care with mentors?
The thought process in that was trying to help our aged out youth be networked well into our community as they embark in their adulthood, right? Because the networking that I would typically do for my children or children just in my circle of influence may not be available to them. And so what we wanted to do was to make sure that as they age out of the foster care system, that they will have just not only Agape Ranch, but just a community of people around them that will support them well.
So you guys decided to match up these young people with mentors, is what you were calling them. And how'd that go?
It didn't go well. They don't want to be mentored.
Right. Yeah.
They didn't like the word mentor, actually. I think by the time that they were 18, they have been pretty much one and one out, right? They have case managers and caseworkers and counselors and everybody that they had to stand for. And as they age out, I think they just kind of got to a point where they're like, hey, I don't want a mentor. I don't want somebody that I have to see every week or every other week. And that was not the type of commitment they wanted. They wanted more of an organic type of a relationship. And so we just pivoted a little bit and decided, how about coaches? Do you just want life coaches in your life where they can just walk with you as you want or you needed? And they did something very similar as mentors, but it was a little bit more organic. And then they also didn't feel like they were allergic to the word, right?
I love that so much. I love the way you guys pivoted. And one other pivot you did, which was amazing to us, was, you contacted us and said, hey, we've been doing this thing. It hasn't worked out quite like we wanted. So we have this other idea and we want to do this Christmas party. And so we're kind of thinking on our end, okay, well, a Christmas party, that's nice. It wasn't exactly what we were thinking in terms of, aiming at, long-term impact on these young people. But you guys had something much different in mind than your normal Christmas party. Can you describe what you did with your community partners to make this Christmas party much more than a Christmas party?
We wanted to create a place where they can come and get gifts and have a Christmas party and have a Christmas meal and all that good stuff. But more than that, we wanted them to have a time where they can be networked into our community well. And so we just identify a few we felt like that were going to be really beneficial to our youth and young adults, such as Goodwill, Chick-fil-A, the Craft Training Center, which they're really awesome because it actually has things like welding and construction, electrician work. And so we wanted them to be a part of that. So we invited all of these people into our Christmas party and let them present and allow the youth to, us to meet them. And what was so cool about it was Chick-fil-A came and brought their HR person and said, hey, if you need resume or if you want to practice interviewing skills, we'll do that with you. And not only today, but if you need to do it a different day, we will set up a time to help you do that. Goodwill came and offered them jobs like on that day. And some of them actually walked out with a job and just made that possible. And then the Craft Training Center, they were able to grab some youth that may be interested in pursuing their program. So that was the coolest part, right? The Christmas party was awesome. And then giving them a pathway forward was even more awesome. So that was pretty fun.
I love that so much. You invite young adults to a Christmas party and they come, they have a great time. They also get a little help with resume skills, interviewing skills, and a handful of them come out of the Christmas party with a job. That's amazing.
Yeah, that was pretty fun.
Well, what a great example of how to pivot, right? Because these things that we do in foster care, the things we try the first time don't always work. And so pivoting is an important part of it. And so amazing job on that. And then just the way that you guys care so much about these young adults and want to pour into them and invest in their future. Just so grateful for you guys.
Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you for what you guys do at More Than Enough and all the things that you guys do as well.
Well, awesome. Well, we're going to transition here into our next segment. We're going to take a short break. And then after that, we are going to talk more about when we meet felt needs, it is so much more than meeting felt needs. We are really investing in a relationship, just like Susan has done and so many others have done. We're going to hear more examples of that right after this. Hey gang, we're going to get back to things here in just a minute, but before we do, I wanted you to know that you can find the show notes for this episode by going to morethanenoughpodcast.org. There's some more information about our guests there, and we have some resources that can help you take your next steps to bring people together in your community to provide more than enough for children and families. And one last thing, at the top of the show notes, there are some buttons that allow you to choose where you normally listen to your podcasts, and you can leave a review for the More Than Enough podcast right there. We would be super grateful if you'd be willing to take the time to do that. Reviews help us to know what we're getting right and how we can give you more of the same in the future. Again, all of this is at morethanenoughpodcast.org. All right, let's get back to things. Welcome back. as we continue our conversation about how stuff is so often about so much more than stuff. When we meet the most immediate needs in front of us, very often that can lead to greater relationship, greater impact, and real life change for folks. And I can't think of a better example of that than Care Portal. Many of you might be familiar with Care Portal, but they are committed to connecting people who have stuff with people who need stuff, for the purpose of establishing a relationship that results in the kind of long-term impact that we're talking about. Now, you'll see, if you were to look at their website, you'd see the amazing amount of economic impact that they've had, the dollar amount of all of the things that they have been able to connect, from people in the church to people in foster care or who are in danger of having their kids go into foster care. The economic impact of those things is huge. But what's even more important than that economic impact is what those physical things they provide through the church, what that means and what that results in terms of relationship and sustainable life impact. So we're going to talk to two people who know all about that. I got the chance to talk to Adrienne Lewis, who's one of the leaders at Care Portal, and Lisa McNerney, and both of them have an incredible perspective on how a connection to physical things actually can lead to greater long-term impact and relationship. Let's go to that conversation with Adrienne and Lisa. I'm here with Adrienne Lewis and Lisa McNerney out of Kansas City. Well, the Kansas City area. One of you's from the Kansas side, one of you's from the Missouri side. I trust we'll have no spats during the course of this interview, though, right?
Lisa wins all the spats, so there's no point.
All right. Adrienne and Lisa work with Care Portal, which has done a tremendous job of engaging people in churches throughout the country, in communities, in foster care, and really practically being able to respond to needs that are in the community. Adrienne, that's sort of an explanation, but I'd love for you to explain a little bit for our listeners who are not familiar. How does Care Portal work?
Yeah, so the idea maybe 7 years ago, when the Global Orphan Project decided to start working domestically as well as international, is to engage pastors around the idea of, can you charge your churches to adopt these kids who are ready to be adopted in the system? At the time in Kansas City, there were 773 kids who needed to be adopted. And so we went to pastor after pastor and said, would you carry the mantle? And we got lots of silence. There wasn't a whole lot of buy-in. It was very difficult. And over time, we started to learn why, because it's a really hard thing to get in front of a church and say, church, we need to adopt these kids. It's just a difficult ask, and so relationships developed over time in different places in the country, and we started learning more. And we spent 2 years of trying to understand the space domestically, because we really didn't have a clue. And through that process, we saw the disconnects that exist out there in communities. And we saw the need is not just for kids to be adopted or to be fostered, but it's way beyond that. And how might we help the church just start somewhere, wherever they're comfortable starting? Just have them start somewhere with the hope that they could go further and meet the real needs that exist. And so literally one day, God just gave us a vision for connecting the dots, not making the dots, just connecting the dots. And the dots are, you've got caseworkers who know of critical needs in a given community. Every day they're on the front line. And you've got churches who are willing to do something. They may not be willing to foster or adopt, but they want to get involved. They could help prevent a family from falling apart, or they could help reunify a family. They could provide for some basic needs that are critical in the process, and maybe even create some relationships along the way. And so Care Portal is simply a technological mechanism to connect the disconnected caseworker who knows of the problem with churches in the community who are willing to receive an email or a text message or an app notification to say, I'm willing to help with something. I could provide a bed or a crib, or I might be able to be a mentor or a tutor or provide transportation, but literally saying this unknown caseworker, an unknown case right down the road from this church that is willing to do something. How do we get them connected up? And that's what Care Portal does. So we build a network in a city of churches and agencies and people who care, and give them on a common platform a way to communicate to each other and meet the needs of these kids and families in crisis.
Yeah, so it's really as simple as a caseworker entering a need into a website or some sort of interface, right? And that need gets out to a point person in a church who can share that need with people that can directly meet that need. So the caseworker is not left to try to figure out how to get the resource from point A to point B. The church is directly meeting that need, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, and we talk all the time about the concept that we often think that there is lack in our world because there are not resources to meet those needs. And what Care Portal is such a great demonstration of is that that's not actually generally true. Is that most of the time, it's not that the resources don't exist to meet a need. It's that the resources that exist to meet a need are not connected to the need that's there, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And so you guys, like you said, connect the dots.
That's right.
So good.
Yeah. And it's pretty awesome to see the church respond. And Lisa can chime in on this because she's been at this in so many different roles in this whole ecosystem, right? But to watch the church just step up and say, yes, we can do this right now, and the difference that it makes. What do you think about that, Lisa?
Yeah, that's been, I think, one of the most amazing pieces of this is that, when you talk to people, just everyday people, my neighbors, my friends, people at church, they want to help, but they don't know where to start. And so with Care Portal and the communication system that comes from Care Portal, it gives them a place to start. And I have many caseworkers I've developed relationships throughout the past 5 years that I've been involved in Care Portal. And it's really awesome to see, they'll call me and they'll say, hey, I'm about to put this big need in. Is this too much? Is this too much to ask for? And I say, you know what? Put it out there and let's see what God does with it. And I will tell you, every single time the churches are stepping up, the people in the community are stepping up to meet those big needs. And the really cool thing is that it's not one person or one church. It's 4 churches, 5 churches saying, hey, we'll pay $200 of this rent. Can anybody else help? And then somebody from the community can say, hey, I'll take another $200. Can anyone else help? And then another church chimes in and says, hey, we can do $300. And before you know it, you have the full amount of rent covered. So that's another really cool thing to watch, is that it's not just one church doing something or one person doing something, one church meeting a need, one person meeting a need. It's all kinds of people and churches in the community coming together to just serve one family.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah. I think the temptation has been historically often for those of us outside of child welfare to be in the business of pointing out potholes, right? And what I love is, as we see local foster care movements emerge around the country with the work that so many are doing, the work that you guys are doing, is that it's the churches. It says we're not in the business of pointing out potholes. We got a bag of asphalt right here, and we're in the business of filling them. Right, we're going out and we're filling needs where we see them, and I love the way that you've engaged the church in that process.
I'm going to steal that, Jason. Bag of asphalt. I just like how that sounds. Just a bag of asphalt, man.
Yeah, all yours, man. So, Lisa, I'd love to know. I mean, how did you get here to begin with? Like, how did you end up being interested in engaging churches in this process to begin with?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting God story as well. I'm a nurse by trade, so I worked as a nurse for about 9 or 10 years before having my kids, and I was blessed enough to stay at home. And I was involved with the Global Orphan Project for a few years before Care Portal started. And I happened to be at the Christian Alliance for Orphans conference in another capacity, sitting at lunch, listening to Adrian and some of the other leaders of Care Portal talk about Care Portal and what was coming. And there was something that just stirred in my heart of how cool is that to be able to learn of needs in your own backyard and be able to serve families in your own backyard. And I just said, I want to be a part of that when it starts. So being in Kansas City, it was a blessing because it started in Texas, but also in Kansas City. And so, and our church happened to be one that jumped on board right from the get-go. And so I just started walking. I didn't know what it would look like. Didn't know what to expect. The first delivery walking into somebody's door, you don't really know what to expect either. But when one of the first needs that I helped with was a single mom with a 12-year-old boy, and in learning more and talking with the caseworker, I learned that 12-year-old boy happened to be in class with my daughter. And he had been sleeping on the floor. This was October. He had started school back in August, like everybody else. They'd moved into an apartment. They had no furniture. They had one chair, a desk, and a TV that one of his friend's parents had given them for their place, but they were rotating through an air mattress between the two of them. And so, honestly, answering that need and going in and meeting her and, realizing, gosh, she is 5 minutes from my home, and I never, ever would have even known her, met her, known her son was sleeping on the floor. That to me was just a huge blessing for me, to be able to be there and to walk alongside of her. And it just created relationship. When we talk about these deliveries, I no longer look at them as a delivery. It's a connection. It's a connection opportunity. And when you walk in the door, you don't know that the family's going to want to connect or that you're going to have the spark to connect. But when God does connect those two things, it's pretty amazing to watch what happens. That single mom, we had a group of us rally around her. She didn't have a car. We were able to take her to interviews for a while, able to help her figure out the bus line, get her a bus pass. She got her job. She worked for about 6 months, saved enough for a car, and now she's on her feet. She just needed support and, a little village to wrap around her. And with that village, she was able to become very successful and get on her feet. So I think God knew putting that particular need in my path right from the beginning would spark so much for me. And it's opened so many doors in many capacities, from walking alongside bio families to walking alongside grandmas that are taking in their grandchildren to keep their families together.
I love that story you told of the single mom, because what it demonstrates is that, yes, you're about helping kids who are already in care, helping families who are already in care, but also the work is about keeping kids out of care, right? And helping, coming alongside families and keeping them out of foster care. That's beautiful. So, Adrian, some might say, okay, this is great. Like, you guys are meeting physical needs and churches are meeting physical needs, and that's great. But at the end of the day, kids need families. And so how does this help get kids families who need them, whether that's a safe place to go in a foster family, or whether that's, permanency in another way with a kinship family, or even in an adoptive family? How does this get us there?
It's a great question. There's several hows, right? So one how is the caseworker literally is in a position where, in order to reunify a family, they need X, Y, and Z. Beds are super common. We'll just stick with that as an example, but it's not the only one. Literally, in order to get these kids back to bio mom, back to dad, they can't do it unless they have some basic needs met and they can establish that, yes, this will be a safe place for the kids to go. And so one of the ways that this care portal is helping provide families through churches is to just remove the barriers that are keeping families apart. And who the heck doesn't want to see a family reunited if it's safe for the kid? Like if it's a good thing for the child, of course, that's mission number one in the foster care system. And so that's a primary way that it happens. Another way it happens is, Lisa's story about grandmas and how common it is where there's a relative who is willing to take in their relative, these children, but they're not prepared for it. They didn't wake up today and say, oh, I think I'm going to take in 2 or 3 kids and be ready for that. But that's what happened. Whatever fell apart, that's what happened. And in my life, or probably your life, Jason, if you guys fell off the rails, your kids would go to a relative. They wouldn't go into the foster care system. That's what would happen. But for a lot of families in poverty and on the edge themselves, they have the love in their heart, but they don't have the environment that's ready for the system to say, you can safely have these children. So what a travesty it would be for these children to go into foster care and be ripped away from their families just because their home isn't quite in shape for those kids, right? So how about we remove that barrier to create family? And then how about the times where there's a child who is in foster care and maybe the family's taken in 2 or 3 kids and stuff is hard and they're on the edge of not being able to keep that placement. So those kids are getting ready to go somewhere else. But the caseworker's like, well, let me see if I can get these resources for this family. Maybe it's some mentoring or some tutoring, or maybe it's some physical things that they need so that these kids can stay there and we don't have to move them. And all of these scenarios, just like in Lisa's story, they present an opportunity for the deeper things, the meaningful connections. And those doors don't always open, but they open a ton. And when they do, that foster family who's isolated, or that grandparent who's isolated, or that biological family who's isolated, they are no longer isolated because the church is wrapping around them. So these collisions, the opportunities for collisions and relationships to start is like the second level. Just meeting the need is the first level. The collisions are the second level. But the third level is stories like Lisa's. There's thousands and thousands of people who started off by meeting a simple need that they were ready to meet. And then God did something. And they moved from there into relationship. They moved from there to an open mind to foster or to adopt or to mentor or to do whatever. And so they moved in their mind and heart to the next level of being able to serve. And some even moved into leadership capacities to mobilize their church or even in their county. The progression is a common story in our own lives, right? And it's a common story in these other lives. And so when I think about, well, how does Care Portal help make families, and how does it move the needle in the foster care system? It's all 3 of those levels happening over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, we know that proximity produces passion, right? And one of the real challenges that we've had in foster care is because of some very good things, confidentiality, things like that. But we've ended up with a system, like you said, Lisa, where you've got these intense needs that are 5 minutes from your house, involving a child that's in your child's classroom, and you are unaware of it. And historically, that has been true, that we are surrounded by needs that we can't see. Right. And what the work you guys are doing is you're making it possible to get close, to draw near to those children and families, to draw near to those needs, to get proximity. And then once you have that, passion results. So good.
For sure.
Jason, I feel compelled to share some of my personal story too in here. I didn't even know what the foster care system was a decade ago. Zero. I had no knowledge. And yet I was part of the Global Orphan Project, and I was, traveling around the world, helping churches care for kids in crisis and in orphan care scenarios. And a grandma at our church, and we live in a suburb. There's not a ton of poverty where we live. And all of a sudden my wife meets this grandma in our church, and she just took in her grandkids. They had all the physical resources that they needed, but they didn't have any support. And so next thing I know, my wife is, mentoring this little girl and boy to just help grandma out and grandpa, because they're 70 years old. And so that was the first time we even heard about the foster care system, was through just that relationship that started. And then sometime later, I'm in Uganda, and I just hear from the Lord to take the foster care class. It's a long, beautiful story, but that's the bullet point, right? And so my wife and I are slowly obedient to that call. And so we do it. And now, 5, 6, 7 years later, we've got 3 kids who we've adopted through the foster care system. And even though I love my boys, if their mom and dad could have, if their grandparents could have been stabilized to really invest in them and be their family, I would prefer that for them. And that's the message in here. Not that foster care and adoption is a bad thing. It's a necessary thing, but it's not the only thing, right? It's on a series of last resorts. You don't go to the doctor and have a knee replacement on your first visit, right? That's not what you do. You try to get some medicine, and you try to get some therapy, and you try to, whatever. And if you have to, then you do surgery. And that's what I think we should be considering the space that we're in. And if we have that mindset, then we'll have more than enough, because there's not a lack of people out there who care on all sides of the spectrum. Bio family and people who are not related. There's tons of us. There's tons of resources. We just got to line ourselves up right for providing what's needed in that scenario, and not always thinking the solution is, well, foster care is where the kids have to be. That's not always a solution. We've been at this for about 5 years, and we think about, is there evidence that this is working? Are church members really moving along in this space? And so we have an ongoing study happening with Washington University in St. Louis, the Brown School evaluation there. And so they did this study, 10,000 people surveyed that are church members who have responded to Care Portal requests, and about 1,000 responded to that survey. And here's 3 really cool things that came out of it. Increased awareness, increased action, and creating meaningful connections were the themes that came out of that study, right? And so, as an example, 89% of the people who took the survey said that Care Portal made them more aware of the needs of kids and families in their community, and 66% said that Care Portal made them more aware of the foster care system in their community. So you start with this baseline of awareness, just like in Lisa's stories, and that starts to fuel action. And so with action, 85% said that Care Portal made it easier for them to assist children and families in their community, and 89% said they're willing to serve more children in the future. That's huge, right? That's a huge thing to say. The people who are getting involved are willing to be more involved even as time goes on. And half the people who made connections, like in Lisa's story there, half of them said they made meaningful connections in the process. That's crazy to think that the proximity that creates passion. I'm stealing that from you too, Jason. That's crazy to think that that's how this is going. And so when I'm thinking about these bridge ministries out there who are trying to do this work, the infrastructure, like you said, of Care Portal, the connectingness that it accomplishes does these things. And I just couldn't be more hungry for ministries to say, let's do more of what we're trying to do. That's what the goal is.
There's a phrase you used, and you said when you're talking about the survey, the study that you guys are doing, and that a certain percentage, I don't remember what the percentage was, numbers, float out of my head too easily. But the key part to me was that they said that Care Portal made it easier. Made it easier for people to care for children and families. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been one of the main complaints lodged against the foster care system for decades, right? Is, okay, you say that there's a need, but why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to make a difference, to do something? Why is it so hard to engage, to get through the process and all those things? And And I think it's such a beautiful snapshot of what Care Portal has done, which is make it easier for people to engage.
Yeah, brother. So here's the truth. Ministry is messy. It's messy. It's hard. I mean, there's no easy button to do ministry, right? But to get into ministry, there shouldn't be a 6-foot barrier. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about the 6-foot barrier that people hear when they're like, oh, I got to take a 10-week class and nobody calls me back. And the class is across town. And what the heck is this home study thing? And so the mindset is just there's a big old 6-foot barrier. And that's what we experienced in the very beginning of this with the story of the pastors and the adoption call, right? And so our whole idea is to make it a 6-inch barrier. Let's just make it a 6-inch barrier so that people can start getting on the playing field and they get in and now they're experiencing some beautiful things and then they're ready for the next 6-inch barrier, right? So the beauty of what we see happening is just meet people where they are and don't expect them to take a huge jump. Give them exposure to a small jump that they can do. And technically speaking, or in practice rather, when you meet a need for a bio mom to have a bed, like Lisa did with that first mom and her 12-year-old son, the legal requirements are low for the agency to allow you to engage that family because it's a mom, it's an adult, right, who's involved in the process. You're not taking a kid away from, you're not in that process of having to become a guardian or something. So the mom just has to give permission as an adult to let that engagement happen. That's how low the bar is. The moms and grandmas and dads don't always do that, but often they do, about 75% of the time. And when they do that, now you can have that proximity and create those meaningful connections when everybody's willing. And that's just different when you mentor even. When you mentor, you got to jump through some hoops because I don't know who you are. Just because you go to a church doesn't mean you can start mentoring a child and be in a formal relationship with them that's sanctioned by that agency. Yeah, you should go through some background checks. And if you're going to foster, you betcha you need to get trained and you bet you have to have a home study. And those are bars that are set for good reason at those different levels. But it doesn't have to be set at the initial level. And the reality is the majority of what has to get done is preventative in nature and is at the low bar spot. So let's get a lot of people there, and then we'll have enough people deeper and deeper into the pool.
That's right. That's great. Yeah, you're replacing fences with staircases, right? Yeah, that's really cool. Before we wind down here, I mean, Adrian, you have been all in from the very beginning when we started discussing this whole idea of More Than Enough becoming a national, coordinated, collaborative effort, both between national organizations and then in every community. And can you talk for a minute about why you're all in?
I believe that Jesus has given us a blueprint for how the church answers the prayer that he made in John 17, right? And that process of being unified, that process of being known, Jesus being known in the world is all about us loving our neighbor. That's what it comes down to. It's all about us starting with who is in front of me that I can show the love of Jesus to. And so I believe that if we create opportunities and clarity and some courage for the church, that there's no scenario where God isn't going to provide for every individual and every church who steps onto the dance floor. He's going to do that because that's just who he is. And so I believe that if we actually get churches to take action, and they are way more than they used to, that we will see the greatest revival in the church that we've seen in this country in a long time. It always comes from the church serving. It always comes from that. And foster care in the wealthiest nation in the world, there is zero reason with 300,000 plus churches that the church isn't fully providing more than enough. There's no reason. So we have a role to play, and we're going to do it.
Adrian, Lisa, what a joy to talk to you. What a joy to just get a chance to listen to your hearts once again. Grateful for you both. Thanks for the work you do.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It's good.
Thank you so much, Adrian and Lisa. Our next guest is an advocate for families and children, as well as a mom, and she's a human trafficking survivor. Stick around for my conversation with her right after this. If you like this podcast and want to dive a little deeper, then we can help. We wrote a book called Until There's More Than Enough that provides basic guidance and examples of how working together can transform foster care where you live. If you have a big, complex problem like foster care, then breaking it into manageable parts and sharing the load with others in your community should be a no-brainer. The hard part is knowing how to do that. If you've ever tried collaborating with others on anything, you know it can get complicated. This simple guide will walk you through some of the most important elements of foster care collaboration as we've learned them from our friends all over the country, and that will help demystify some of those complex dynamics. You know that foster care where you live could be much better for children and families, and you know that you can't do it alone. You can order Until There's More Than Enough on Amazon. But if you need 12 or more copies for others in your church, organization, or community, you can get a bulk discount. Just go to the show notes for this episode at morethanenoughpodcast.org. Again, that's morethanenoughpodcast.org. Just go to the show notes and find a link there for our bulk ordering page. All right, let's get back to the podcast. I'd like to introduce you to our next guest, Stephanie Sanders. She's going to share with us today some of her story and the people and organizations who came alongside her and what she describes as the journey for her to get back to Christ and also back to herself. Here's my conversation with Stephanie. I'm here talking to Stephanie from Jacksonville, Florida. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to share a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Stephanie Sanders. I'm 48 years old. And when I was 13 years old, I was initially trafficked by a family member. And it really derailed what would be the next 30 years of my life. Because of that initial abuse, I was in the mind that that was the only thing I had to offer the world. So I continued to use drugs, go to jail, and be in several relationships where I was being used to provide money for someone else. When in 2009, I had my child that I'm raising now. Before that, I had 4 other children that were placed for adoption at birth. When I had my last child, Lolita, I just knew that I wanted to raise her and that I wanted to change my life, but I really didn't know how. I didn't know at that time that God had a plan or what that was. I went for many years, struggled, relapsed, recovered. And in 2017, I was arrested for the last time. I was placed through the drug court program. My child was removed and placed with my mom in family foster care. And I would start the journey to get back to Christ, but also to get back to myself. I was able to get my daughter back in 6 months. My drug court case manager actually referred me to a program called the Dent Project here in Jacksonville, which is a Christian organization that helps survivors of trafficking. I learned more about what had happened to me and what Christ wanted to do in my life.
You'd mentioned earlier that you didn't even realize that what you'd been experiencing was trafficking. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, well, we know now, and I know now with education, that trafficking, it starts with grooming and then it goes to this whole coercion aspect when I thought I was just a bad person. I thought that I wanted those things to happen to me. I thought that those were bad choices. Or in some instances, I thought that I was a criminal. I didn't really realize or wrap my head around the fact that I was being forced to do this to give somebody else the money. I had never kept any money for myself. It was just the scenario that had played out in my life, all of my life. And that's what I thought life was until I knew that it was more than that.
So then after that, what was your experience?
Through that, I went through several years, even sober and trying to raise my daughter, of struggling to get employment because of my criminal record. When COVID hit, things were excruciating because I really didn't have a safe place. I went to Daytona and tried to start over and tried to get some more resources. I was able to find housing, and I was connected finally with Salty Family Services.
When you contacted Salty Family Services, what was the thinking there? What were you trying to do by contacting them?
I just wanted a job. I needed somebody to advocate for me, but I just was being turned down everywhere because of my criminal record.
What kind of response did you get from them when you contacted them?
Well, my mentor said, this is hard. And she prayed with me. And for weeks, I would interview and we would pray, and I would interview and we would pray. And then finally, I saw a ad on Indeed for a job at a domestic violence shelter. And I knew that I qualified and I knew that I would be good at that. But I needed a way in. I needed somebody to sit down and listen to me. And my mentor got with Jeff, who is the director of Salty Family Services. And he made a phone call to the CEO of the domestic violence shelter. And I got an interview.
And you got the job.
And I got the job. And I worked there for about 2.5 years. And during this time, I was hearing from Jeff at Salty. I was participating in different activities they had. I was also referring our clients at the DV shelter to Salty Family Services. So we had a relationship that was built. And I knew, bottom line, I knew that people wanted me to succeed and were invested in me doing better, not only for myself, but they saw my daughter too.
So what were some of the other things that came with that ongoing relationship that you ended up building with Jeff and the others there?
The main thing is that I got this confidence. And so the next time I applied for a job, I applied for a survivor mentorship position here at the Dolores Bar Weaver Policy Center, which is an advocacy center basically for girls and women in the state of Florida. I work for the Open Doors Outreach Network, which serves basically girls from 10 to 24. Most of the girls that I deal with either have been or are in foster care. So I get to serve and give back and fill up the same demographic I was in and didn't get any help when I was young. Now I'm able to be that light that I searched for so long and didn't get until I was in my 40s.
You mentioned the confidence that you were able to build over time. Can you give me an idea of what your confidence level was like when you first started that job search?
Oh, it was nothing because it took me 2 months to get an apartment because of my record. It was like everywhere I get, no's do affect you, especially when you've been through significant amounts of abuse, addiction, things that aren't pretty. And when you get no after no, it kind of tears down yourself. Well, why am I even here? Why did I even get sober? Nobody will tell me yes. And, to be honest with you, when I first got with Salty, and every week somebody was praying with me. I knew somebody cared. Like, it made it a little easier to hang on to hope that eventually things would be okay.
So now that you are doing the work that you do, which is amazing, by the way, with young women, what are some of the things that you pass on to them that you wish you'd known when you were their age?
The love of God and Jesus. And I pray with my clients. If they want, I don't push it. But if there's a longing, or if they talk about God at all, I expand on that, because only with the love of Christ did I realize my true worth. And only for Salty Family Services and then the Christian trafficking organization, only with those pieces am I standing here today with my child.
Well, Stephanie, that's incredible, and we're so thankful for you and for the work that you do, and the way God is using your story, and the broken pieces of that, but how God's using it for His glory and the lives of other young women. Wow, what an absolutely incredible way to end our conversation today. Just like we've been talking about all along during this episode, Stephanie showed up. She made that phone call looking for a job. But what she got, as she describes, was confidence, and she got relationship. And she got so much more than she bargained for. One of the things I love most about that story is she talked about how her coach at the time, when she was going back and she was trying to figure out how to find a job, and the main thing that this person offered her was prayer. And so often when we walk alongside people who have needs, it feels so overwhelming and it feels so out of our control, and we just can't even begin to know how to help. That prayer is the place to go. It is the place to start. It's not a filler. It's not a nothing. It's not something we do when we don't know what else to do. It is the first place we should go. And those prayers resulted in tremendous blessing for Stephanie and life change for her. So grateful for her and her willingness to share her story and the way in which her life is now impacting so many others. Well, today we've heard stories about Christmas parties, pancakes, prayers, mentors, meals, leaders and advocates who knew that first meeting these tangible needs of children and families was important, but also imagined that meeting a particular tangible need didn't have to be the end of the story. You know, a bike, a bunk bed, a prayer can lead families to being cared for and children being loved in those families. I want to thank all of our guests today, as well as our producer, Amanda Baird, who thinks that bananas are the best pancake ingredient, and our audio engineer, Daniel Davidson, who thinks that chocolate chips just can't be beat. Thank you for joining us today, and thanks for all you do to care for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care, until there's more than enough.
This has been the More Than Enough podcast. Join us next time as we introduce you to more of our friends who are passionate about helping you and your friends work together to provide more than enough for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care where you live. Explore show notes and learn more at morethanenoughpodcast.org.